The hospital nursery was drenched in a pale, ghostly light. Machines hummed softly, their rhythms steady and cold, as Nurse Grace stood frozen by the crib. A man in a surgical mask stepped closer, his gloved hands reaching toward her newborn daughter. Panic seized her chest like a fist. "Please, don't take my baby," she begged, her voice breaking in the sterile silence. The man didn't respond. His eyes were dark, unreadable behind the mask, reflecting the dim fluorescent glow. The air between them felt electric, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Grace's heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out the hum of machines. Every instinct screamed that something about him was wrong, terribly wrong. Her trembling fingers gripped the edge of the crib. The baby stirred, a tiny sound escaping her lips, fragile and pure. Grace took a step forward, blocking the stranger's path, her white uniform stained with tears. "I don't care what they told." "You," she whispered. "She's mine." The man's posture stiffened, but he still said nothing. "Before I go on, tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. I love knowing where our stories reach. It makes moments like this feel a little less lonely. And if you're new here, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And if you believe in second chances, keep watching. Her story is about to test what love really means." The man's hand hesitated in midair. The faint scent of antiseptic mixed with something human. Fear. Grace could see it in his trembling fingers. He wasn't a cold enforcer or a government agent. There was conflict in his eyes, something buried deep beneath the mask. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Who sent you?" Her voice cracked, echoing against the sterile walls. The man stepped back, his breathing heavy. For a brief second, Grace thought she saw pain, not malice, flicker behind his gaze. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, the man reached up to his face. The elastic strap snapped softly as his gloved hands removed the mask. Grace's breath caught in her throat. The face beneath was familiar, achingly familiar, and time itself seemed to stop. The world blurred. The hospital lights faded into a soft halo around his features. Grace staggered back, clutching her chest as recognition flooded her mind. "No," she whispered. "It can't be you." Her knees weakened, the weight of memory crashing down like a wave. He spoke her name, Grace, and the sound of it broke her. His voice was calm, but his eyes shimmered with something deeper. Sorrow, gratitude, guilt. "You don't remember me," he said softly, "but years ago, you saved my brother." Grace froze, the words slicing through the panic. The stranger, this man who had come to take her baby, was tied to a past she had tried to forget. The air seemed to thicken, filled with ghosts of choices she once made. And as her baby stirred again, crying softly, Grace realized that this night was only the beginning. That morning had started like any other. The soft hum of hospital monitors, the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the break room. Grace adjusted her scrubs, unaware that by sundown her life would be in ruins. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway, followed by whispers that silenced as she passed. Something in the air felt colder than usual. When she reached the nurses' station, the head physician, Dr. Merrill, was waiting. His expression was a mixture of pity and authority. "Grace," he said carefully, "there's been a serious allegation." Her stomach tightened. "About you." Around them, her colleagues pretended to look busy, their eyes avoiding hers. They accused her of negligence, of endangering a patient during surgery. Grace's hands trembled as she read the report. The name of the supposed victim was blurred by tears. She knew this was impossible. She had done everything right. Every decision she made that night had been to save a life, not endanger it. Dr. Merrill avoided her eyes. "You're suspended pending investigation." His voice carried the weight of finality. Grace wanted to scream, but the words refused to form. Around her, the hospital that once felt like a second home now seemed foreign, cold marble and fluorescent light swallowing her whole. As she packed her locker, she overheard the whispers. It was bound to happen. She got too close to the wrong people. The sting of betrayal burned hotter than any accusation. Grace had dedicated her entire life to saving others, and now they were watching her drown. Outside, reporters were already waiting. Cameras flashed like lightning as she tried to shield her face. "Grace Harper, how does it feel to have cost a man his life?" one shouted. She froze. The same hospital logo gleamed on their microphones. Someone inside had fed them the story. That night, Grace sat in her car outside her apartment, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face looked unfamiliar, tired, hollow. The city lights blurred through tears. She whispered to herself, "They can't take everything from me, can they?" But deep down, she already knew they could. At home, the nursery was silent except for the faint creak of the rocking chair. Baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm outside. Grace leaned over the crib, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "You're my reason," she whispered. "Whatever happens, I'll protect you." The next morning, an envelope waited at her door. Thick, official, stamped with the state seal. Grace's hands shook as she tore it open. Custody review pending, due to professional misconduct. Her knees gave out. The paper slipped from her fingers like a death sentence. By nightfall, she sat in the dark, clutching her baby and staring out the window. The city skyline flickered in the distance, mocking her isolation. She had lost her job, her name, her reputation. The world had turned against her. But as she held her daughter close, a quiet resolve began to rise within her. If the system wanted a fight, it would get one. The morning sun crept through the blinds, slicing thin lines of gold across the nursery wall. Grace woke to the sound of her daughter's soft breathing beside her, the only comfort she had left. For a fleeting moment, it felt like the world had paused, as if the chaos of the past days had been nothing more than a bad dream. Then came the knock on the door. Two officials stood in the hallway, their suits immaculate, their expressions devoid of warmth. One held a clipboard, the other a sealed envelope. "Ms. Harper," the woman began, "we're here on behalf of Child Protective Services." The words hit harder than any accusation. Grace's heartbeat quickened. She tried to stay calm, asking what this was about, but she already knew. The report, the false charges, everything was leading to this moment. "We have to review the child's living conditions," the woman continued. Grace stepped aside, her body numb. The men entered, scanning the apartment with clinical detachment. The nursery, once a sanctuary of soft colors and lullabies, now felt like a crime scene. One of them noted the peeling wallpaper, another the unopened formula cans. Grace wanted to scream that she hadn't had time, that she'd been fighting for her job, her name, her sanity. But her words felt small, powerless. When they finally left, the silence was unbearable. Grace sank into the rocking chair, holding her baby tightly, her tears dampening the tiny blanket. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, cars passing, birds singing, but inside that room, something sacred had begun to break. That night she sat by the crib watching her daughter sleep. The glow of the baby monitor cast soft shadows on the wall, the rhythmic rise and fall of her baby's chest hypnotizing. "I'll never let them take you," Grace whispered, "not while I'm breathing." But deep down, fear was gnawing at her promise. Days passed. The phone rang constantly, reporters, lawyers, strangers claiming to want her side. Grace stopped answering. She barely ate. The apartment smelled faintly of milk and disinfectant, the air heavy with sleepless nights. Then, one afternoon, the same envelope returned, thicker this time. Inside was the verdict: temporary loss of custody, effective immediately. Grace's hands trembled as she read the words again and again, praying they'd change. The walls seemed to close in around her. She rushed to the crib, clutching her baby as if sheer will could erase the ink on that paper. When the officers came to enforce the order, she refused to open the door. "Please," she cried from inside, "I didn't do anything wrong." Her voice echoed through the small apartment. The baby began to cry, her tiny wail blending with Grace's desperate sobs. On the other side, a man's voice answered softly, "Ma'am, we have no choice." By the time the door finally opened, Grace was on her knees beside the empty crib, her arms still reaching for what had been taken. The nursery light flickered once, then dimmed completely. All that remained was the faint scent of her baby's blanket, and the hollow sound of a mother's heart breaking into silence. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as Grace sat alone in the darkened apartment. The clock ticked toward midnight, each second slicing deeper into her exhaustion. The crib beside her was empty now, a quiet monument to everything she had lost. She held her daughter's blanket in her lap, pressing it to her face, breathing in what little of her remained. The city outside moved on without her. Neon lights bled through the rain-streaked glass, reflecting like shattered dreams across the floor. Grace hadn't eaten all day. The television muttered in the background, a news report about hospital corruption, scandals, names she recognized but couldn't bear to hear. She turned it off, heart pounding. Then came the first knock. 3 soft taps, deliberate and slow. Grace froze, the sound slicing through the stillness. Another knock followed, firmer this time. She hesitated, torn between fear and hope. Maybe it was a lawyer or someone from the hospital willing to help. But her gut whispered otherwise. She crept toward the door, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Just the sound of rain hitting the hallway window. When she finally peeked through the peephole, 2 figures stood outside, one in uniform and one wearing a white surgical mask. Her heart sank. Child Protective Services. Again. But something about the masked man sent chills crawling up her spine. He wasn't dressed like the others. No badge, no clipboard, just that clean, sterile mask hiding his face. The officer beside him glanced nervously, as if unsure what to say. "Ms. Harper," he said, "we have an order." Grace's fingers gripped the doorknob until her knuckles went white. "You already took her," she whispered. "You already took my baby." The officer shifted uncomfortably. "We've received new instructions," he replied. "Your child is being transferred to a secure medical facility for evaluation." The words didn't make sense. None of it did. Through the glass, the masked man raised his eyes to hers, calm, almost sorrowful. Something about them felt hauntingly familiar, though she couldn't place it. Grace's breath quickened. Every instinct told her to run, but part of her, the part still clinging to hope, refused to believe this was the end. She opened the door just enough for the chain to hold. "Let me see the paperwork," she demanded. The officer hesitated, pulling out a crumpled envelope. Grace scanned it through the gap. The letterhead looked real, but the signature was smudged. "Who authorized this?" she pressed. Silence. The masked man's gaze never left her. Then softly, the man spoke for the first time. "Please, Ms. Harper," he said. His voice was low, almost reverent. "Let me in. We don't have much time." Grace's pulse surged. There was something in his tone, a tremor, a familiarity that struck a chord deep inside her chest. The officer turned to him, startled. "You're not supposed to—" But before he could finish, the masked man stepped forward, pushing the door open wider. The chain snapped with a metallic click. Grace stumbled backward, gasping. As lightning flashed through the window, his shadow filled the room. And for the first time, she realized her nightmare was far from over. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with tension and fear. Grace stood pressed against the wall, her trembling hands raised slightly as if trying to hold back the inevitable. The masked man's shadow loomed across the nursery wallpaper, stretching over the empty crib like a dark omen. The officer lingered near the door, uncertain and uneasy. "Where is she?" Grace demanded, her voice shaking but sharp. The officer avoided her eyes, flipping through his clipboard as if searching for an excuse. "She's safe," he muttered. "That's all I can say." Grace took a step forward, anger burning through her grief. "Safe where?" she cried. "You had no right." The masked man moved closer, his gloved hands raised in a gesture of calm. "Please, Miss Harper," he said softly. "We don't want to hurt you." His tone was controlled, but something in it cracked, a trace of hesitation, a whisper of empathy. Grace caught it instantly. She looked straight into his eyes, desperate for a human answer. "Don't you dare touch me," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "You don't know what you're doing. She's all I have left." The man paused mid-step, his breathing audible behind the mask. The officer glanced at him, confused, as if silently questioning who was really in charge. Grace clutched the baby blanket to her chest, her fingers digging into the soft fabric. "Please," she whispered now, her strength dissolving into tears. "Don't take my baby." The words came out broken, almost soundless. Her knees gave way, and she fell to the floor, sobbing into the fabric that once held her child. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the storm outside, rain striking the glass like desperate knocks from the world beyond. The masked man's hand twitched, uncertain. His shoulders tensed as if fighting something unseen. The officer shifted, growing impatient. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. But the masked man didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on Grace, on the way she clung to that blanket as if her soul depended on it. "She doesn't deserve this," he said under his breath. The officer turned sharply. "What did you say?" The tension snapped like a live wire. Grace lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Please, tell me where she is. I'll do anything." Her voice was no longer a plea, it was a vow. The man looked at her for a long, silent moment, something flickering in his eyes. Recognition, maybe regret. He took one step back and spoke quietly. "You shouldn't have trusted them." Before she could respond, the officer's radio crackled. "Unit 4, status check." The distraction broke the spell. Grace lunged toward the masked man, gripping his sleeve. "Tell me!" she screamed. The man froze, then pulled away. But for just a heartbeat, their eyes met, and Grace saw it. He wasn't her enemy, not entirely. Lightning flared again, illuminating his face beneath the mask's shadow. He turned toward the window, voice low but urgent. "Grace, you need to listen to me. I'm not here to take your baby." The words struck her like thunder, and as the storm raged outside, she felt her world tilt again. This time, towards something far more dangerous than loss. The truth. For a moment, the words hung in the air, impossible to process. "I'm not here to take your baby." Grace blinked, her mind scrambling for meaning. The officer looked just as confused. "What the hell are you talking about?" he barked, reaching for his radio. But before he could speak, the masked man moved, swift, deliberate. He shoved the door shut, twisting the lock with a loud metallic click. The officer lunged forward, but the man turned, striking him with a precise blow to the shoulder. The clipboard clattered to the floor, papers scattering like snow. "I'm sorry," the man said breathlessly, "but I can't let them take her." His voice trembled, not with rage, but conviction. Grace stood frozen, unable to decide whether to run or listen. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man stepped closer, rainwater dripping from his sleeves. For a heartbeat, he hesitated, then slowly, he reached up. The mask came off with a soft rustle, revealing a face that stopped Grace's heart mid-beat. It was Ethan, older now, worn by time but unmistakable. His eyes, the same deep, solemn eyes, carried the weight of memories Grace had tried to bury. "You," she whispered, "you were there. Years ago. The accident." Ethan nodded, his voice barely above a breath. "You saved my brother, and they destroyed you for it." Grace stumbled back, her mind spinning. "That's impossible. He died." Ethan shook his head. "No. He lived because of you. None of us knew. But what you didn't is that you saved the wrong life, at least in their eyes." His tone darkened. "You uncovered something you were never supposed to see." The officer groaned on the floor, slowly regaining consciousness. Ethan grabbed him by the collar, pressing a finger to his lips. "Quiet," he warned. Then he turned back to Grace. "You've been set up since that night. The board, the hospital, even the investigation. It was all orchestrated." His words hit like blows. Grace's breath came in short gasps. Why? Why would they do this? Ethan's expression softened, the anger in his eyes replaced by sorrow. "Because you saw the file, the transfer lists. You remember them, don't you?" Grace's eyes widened. She did. Patients listed for operations that never took place, blood types that didn't match. Ethan's voice dropped lower, urgent. "Those weren't patients, Grace. They were donors. The hospital was harvesting organs under the guise of experimental treatments. You stumbled across the truth and they silenced you before you could speak." The words chilled her blood, the accusations, the suspension. It all made terrible, perfect sense. Grace's knees weakened. She leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. "Then why are you here?" she asked finally. Ethan's eyes met hers, steady, desperate. "Because I owe you my brother's life," he said, "and because they're coming for you next." Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. The storm had turned violent, wind tearing through the night like an omen. Ethan stepped forward, his face pale in the lightning's flash. "We have to leave now," he said. "If we stay another minute, neither of us, you nor your baby, will survive what's coming." The storm outside had turned into a violent symphony of thunder and wind. Grace stood in the middle of the room, still trembling from Ethan's words. Every part of her wanted to deny what he'd said, to believe this was all some cruel misunderstanding, but deep down she knew. The lies, the reports, the way everyone had turned their backs, it all fit too perfectly. Ethan crouched beside the unconscious officer, checking his pulse. "He'll wake up soon," he said. "We don't have much time." Grace stared at him, her mind torn between fear and disbelief. "Why should I trust you?" she demanded. Up his eyes sharp yet heavy with guilt. "Because you already did once, and it cost you everything." He pulled a small flash drive from his pocket, holding it between his fingers. "This," he said, "is the proof. Every name, every transfer, every payment. It's the reason they ruined you, and it's the reason we can take them down." The tiny device glimmered under the flickering light, like a key to the past she never meant to unlock. Grace shook her head, stepping back. "You think I can just expose them? I've already lost everything. My baby, my job." Her voice broke. "I'm nobody now." Ethan's tone softened, his words deliberate. "That's exactly why they'll never see you coming. You've got nothing left to lose, and that makes you powerful." He stood, offering his hand. "There's a safe place we can go," he said. "Off the grid. People I trust will protect you and your daughter until this is over." Grace hesitated, glancing toward the window. Flashing blue lights flickered in the distance. The authorities were closing in. Her pulse quickened. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the crib, now empty. "Because I've watched good people die for staying silent," he said. "You didn't. You tried to do the right thing, and they punished you for it. I won't let that happen again." His conviction felt real, raw, unguarded. The radio on the fallen officer's belt crackled. "Unit 4, respond." Grace jumped at the sound. Ethan grabbed the device, switched it off, and shoved it into his pocket. "They'll trace him soon," he warned. "We have minutes, maybe less." The wind outside roared like a warning from the night itself. Grace looked down at the baby blanket still clutched in her hands, the only piece of her daughter she had left. The thought of leaving without her felt unbearable. "I can't go," she said. "Not without her." Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady but urgent. "You will see her again, Grace, but if you stay here, you'll never get the chance." Tears welled in her eyes. She searched his face for a lie, for any sign of manipulation, but found only exhaustion and resolve. "How do I know this isn't another trap?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You don't," he admitted. "But if you stay, I can promise you what comes next will destroy you." A flash of lightning illuminated the room as Grace finally reached for his hand. "Okay," she whispered, "tell me what to do." Ethan's grip was firm, certain. "First," he said, glancing toward the hallway, "we disappear." And as thunder shook the walls, Grace realized she had just made the most dangerous, and possibly the only, choice left in her life. The hallway outside was a blur of shadows and flickering light. Ethan led the way, moving with the silent precision of someone who had planned this for weeks. Grace followed close behind, clutching the baby blanket to her chest like a talisman. Every echo of their footsteps felt deafening in the sterile corridor. Somewhere above them, an alarm began to wail. "This way," Ethan hissed, guiding her toward a service stairwell. The metallic door groaned as he forced it open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and engine oil. Grace's lungs burned with adrenaline. "Where are we going?" she whispered. Ethan didn't look back. "Down! The hospital's basement connects to the old wing. It's been closed for years." They descended in near darkness, the faint red glow of emergency lights casting eerie shadows along the walls. Pipes dripped overhead, and the sound of distant thunder blended with the rising storm outside. Grace's hands shook as she gripped the railing. "You've done this before," she said softly. Ethan's voice was calm, but strained. "Enough times to know it never gets easier." When they reached the basement, Ethan pulled a flashlight from his coat. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of abandoned equipment, rusted gurneys, broken monitors, dust-covered charts. "This place gives me chills," Grace whispered. "That's why no one comes here," he replied. "It's perfect." As they moved deeper into the corridor, a sudden sound made Grace freeze, the sharp creak of a door opening behind them. Ethan spun around, gun drawn. A voice echoed down the hall. "Freeze! Hospital security!" Flashlights cut through the dark like knives. Grace's heart pounded as she ducked behind a supply cart, the cold metal biting her palms. Ethan fired a single warning shot toward the ceiling. The echo thundered through the basement. "Run!" he shouted. Grace didn't hesitate. She bolted down the corridor, her shoes slipping on the wet concrete. The beam of a flashlight grazed her shoulder as a voice screamed, "Stop! You're under arrest!" But she kept running. The corridor ended at a steel door with a faded exit sign above it. Ethan slammed into it full force, the hinges shrieking before the door burst open. Rain poured in, cold and relentless, soaking them instantly. They stumbled into the alley behind the hospital, their breath visible in the night air. The city lights flickered in the distance like distant stars. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a black van parked near the dumpsters. "Get in," he ordered. Grace hesitated only a second before obeying. Inside, the engine was already running. The driver, a woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, nodded silently. "We've got 2 minutes," she said. "Go." As the van sped through the back streets, Grace pressed her forehead to the rain-streaked window. The hospital faded into the night, a cold fortress swallowed by the storm. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't yet ask. Beside her, Ethan sat in silence, watching the mirrors with a soldier's precision. "You said we'd be safe," Grace whispered. "For now," he replied. "But this is just the beginning." Lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing the endless stretch of darkness they were heading into. Grace tightened her grip on the blanket, her pulse finally slowing. The fear didn't fade. It transformed into something else. Determination. She didn't know where they were going, only that she wasn't done fighting, not yet. The hallway outside was a blur of shadows and flickering light. Ethan led the way, moving with the silent precision of someone who had planned this for weeks. Grace followed close behind, clutching the baby blanket to her chest like a talisman. Every echo of their footsteps felt deafening in the sterile corridor. Somewhere above them, an alarm began to wail. "This way," Ethan hissed, guiding her toward a service stairwell. The metallic door groaned as he forced it open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and engine oil. Grace's lungs burned with adrenaline. "Where are we going?" she whispered. Ethan didn't look back. "Down. The hospital's basement connects to the old wing. It's been closed for years." They descended in near darkness, the faint red glow of emergency lights casting eerie shadows along the walls. Pipes dripped overhead, and the sound of distant thunder blended with the rising storm outside. Grace's hands shook as she gripped the railing. "You've done this before," she said softly. Ethan's voice was calm but strained. "Enough times to know it never gets easier." When they reached the basement, Ethan pulled a flashlight from his coat. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rows of abandoned equipment, rusted gurneys, broken monitors, dust-covered charts. "This place gives me chills," Grace whispered. "That's why no one comes here," he replied. "It's perfect." As they moved deeper into the corridor, a sudden sound made Grace freeze, the sharp creak of a door opening behind them. Ethan spun around, gun drawn. A voice echoed down the hall. "Freeze! Hospital security!" Flashlights cut through the dark like knives. Grace's heart pounded as she ducked behind a supply cart, the cold metal biting her palms. Ethan fired a single warning shot toward the ceiling. The echo thundered through the basement. "Run!" he shouted. Grace didn't hesitate. She bolted down the corridor, her shoes slipping on the wet concrete. The beam of a flashlight grazed her shoulder as a voice screamed, "Stop! You're under arrest!" But she kept running. The corridor ended at a steel door with a faded exit sign above it. Ethan slammed into it full force, the hinges shrieking before the door burst open. Rain poured in, cold and relentless, soaking them instantly. They stumbled into the alley behind the hospital, their breath visible in the night air. The city lights flickered in the distance like distant stars. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a black van parked near the dumpsters. "Get in," he ordered. Grace hesitated only a second before obeying. Inside, the engine was already running. The driver, a woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, nodded silently. "We've got 2 minutes," she said. "Go." As the van sped through the back streets, Grace pressed her forehead to the rain-streaked window. The hospital faded into the night, a cold fortress swallowed by the storm. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't yet ask. Beside her, Ethan sat in silence, watching the mirrors with a soldier's precision. "You said we'd be safe," Grace whispered. "For now," he replied. "But this is just the beginning." Lightning illuminated the road ahead, revealing the endless stretch of darkness they were heading into. Grace tightened her grip on the blanket, her pulse finally slowing. The fear didn't fade. It transformed into something else. Determination. She didn't know where they were going, only that she wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The storm had faded into a soft drizzle by the time night swallowed the farmhouse. Inside, only the lantern's dim glow cut through the dark. Grace sat by the window, watching raindrops trace slow paths down the glass. The forest outside was silent, too silent. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like waiting. Ethan worked quietly at the table, scanning the files they'd brought. Every so often he'd scribble notes, his brow furrowed with concentration. Grace studied him, the precision in his movements, the exhaustion behind his steady mask of calm. He wasn't just helping her, he was carrying something heavy too. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. Ethan didn't look up. "Because I owe you." Grace frowned. "You don't owe me your life." He stopped writing, his voice low. "No, but my brother's, and maybe my conscience." The flicker of the lantern danced across his face, softening the sharp edges of guilt carved into it. Grace leaned back, clutching the baby blanket still folded in her lap. "You said she's safe. Where is she?" Ethan hesitated. "With someone who can protect her better than either of us right now. But it won't last. They'll trace the photo eventually." His words carried the weight of truth, and Grace's heart ached at the thought of her daughter alone somewhere in the city. In the corner, Lena checked a small radio transmitter, adjusting its frequency. "The lines are clear," she said, "but if we transmit anything even for a second, they'll know we're alive." Ethan nodded. "Then we stay dark." The room fell back into silence, broken only by the faint crackle of the lantern's flame. Hours passed. Grace wandered through the rooms, the floorboards creaking beneath her bare feet. Every shadow seemed to whisper. She found an old bedroom upstairs, dusty sheets, a cracked mirror, the faint scent of lavender long faded. She sat on the bed, exhaustion pulling at her bones. For the first time in days, she closed her eyes. But sleep didn't bring peace. In her dreams, she was back in the operating room. Alarms blaring, hands covered in blood, voices shouting orders she couldn't follow. When she jolted awake, her chest was tight, her pulse racing. The storm had returned, lightning flashing through the window like a ghost's breath. Downstairs, Ethan was still awake. He looked up as she entered, concern flickering in his eyes. "Bad dream?" he asked. Grace nodded. "It's not a dream," she murmured. "It's the night that never ends." Ethan's expression softened. "Then, maybe it's time to make it end, on your terms." She looked at him uncertain. "You really think I can stop them?" He leaned forward, his tone firm. "You're the only one who can. You're the proof they fear most. The nurse who lived." Grace's throat tightened. "I didn't mean to uncover anything," she whispered. "I just wanted to help people." Ethan gave a faint smile. "That's exactly why you're dangerous." As dawn began to bleed across the treetops, Grace stood by the window once more. The rain had stopped, but the mist lingered, a veil between the past and what came next. She could almost see her daughter's face in the fog. "Hold on," she whispered to the empty air. "Mommy's coming." Behind her, Ethan gathered the files into a bag. The fight was far from over. Dawn broke in muted shades of grey, the kind of morning that felt suspended between calm and catastrophe. Grace sipped the bitter coffee Lena had made, staring out the kitchen window at the fog weaving through the pines. For a moment it almost felt peaceful, until she noticed the birds. They weren't singing. They were gone. Ethan appeared in the doorway, already dressed, his bag slung over his shoulder. "We can't stay here much longer," he said. "If they track the van, they'll find this place." Lena frowned. "I scrubbed the route," she insisted. We should have a few days. Ethan shook his head. They're faster than you think. Grace's hands tightened around the mug. So what now? She asked. Ethan spread a small map across the table. There's an old service tunnel under the rail yard 10 miles north. We can get through before dawn tomorrow. His tone was calm, but Grace saw the strain beneath it, the quiet panic of a man running out of time. Lena moved toward the door to check the perimeter. I'll do another sweep, she said, slipping a gun into her jacket. Lock everything until I'm back. Grace watched. Her leave, the wooden door creaking shut behind her. For the first time since they'd arrived, the house felt too quiet. Ethan glanced toward the window. Something's off, he muttered. Grace followed his gaze. 2 faint headlights flickered through the distant trees. Could be a car on the main road, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Ethan moved closer to the window, eyes narrowing. No road runs that way. A chill ran through her. Ethan grabbed the files from the table and shoved them into his pack. Basement, now! Grace obeyed, her heartbeat quickening. The old stairs groaned beneath their feet as they descended into the damp darkness. The air smelled of earth and rust. What if it's Lena? Grace whispered. Then she's already in trouble, he replied grimly. The sound of engines broke the silence above. Low, methodical, too many to count. Boots followed. Grace's stomach twisted. She pressed herself against the wall as dust drifted from the ceiling. A man's voice barked orders outside. Secure the perimeter. No one leaves. Ethan's jaw clenched. They found us. Grace's mind raced. How? Ethan didn't answer, but the guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. There's a tracker, he said finally. In one of the drives, maybe the radio. Grace felt sick. We should have destroyed them. Ethan shook his head. No, they're proof. Without them, none of this matters. The basement door above creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Grace's pulse pounded in her ears. Ethan motioned for silence, raising his gun toward the stairs. The light from above cut through the cracks. A shadow appeared, then another. The intruders moved slowly, methodically, as if they already knew where their prey was hiding. Grace grabbed Ethan's arm. There's another way out, isn't there? He nodded toward a narrow vent in the corner. It leads outside, but it's tight. You'll have to go first. She hesitated, her eyes locked on his. What about you? He forced a small, steady smile. I'll be right behind you. But in his eyes, Grace saw the truth. He wouldn't be. The basement trembled with the weight of footsteps above. Dust fell from the beams like drifting ash. Grace crouched near the vent, her hands shaking as she unscrewed the rusted grate. Ethan's flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Go, he whispered. Don't look back. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the fear he wouldn't admit. Grace hesitated. You said you'd be right behind me. Ethan gave a faint nod. I will, but if they see you, this was all for nothing. She bit her lip, tears already burning her eyes. Ethan, please. He reached out, pressing something into her palm, a small flash drive wrapped in tape. This is everything, he said. Names, evidence, the truth. Above them, a door slammed open. Voices filled the house, sharp, commanding, organized. Grace could hear boots pounding against the floorboards. Ethan turned toward the sound, his gun steady. Go, Grace, he shouted. Now! She crawled into the vent, the cold metal scraping her arms as she pushed herself forward into the darkness. The air grew thin and heavy. Behind her, the muffled chaos grew louder. Shouts, gunfire, the crash of furniture splintering. Grace kept crawling, the flash drive clutched tight in her fist. She wanted to scream his name, to tell him not to do this, but she knew it would doom them both. A flash of light flared behind her. Gunfire. She froze, heart pounding so violently it hurt. Then came a sound that would haunt her forever. Ethan's voice, raw and defiant, shouting, She's gone! "You'll never find her," followed by the echo of a single final shot. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Tears blurred her vision as she pushed through the vent's final panel. The night air hit her face like a slap. Cold, alive, merciless. She stumbled into the forest, falling to her knees in the mud. The world spun. Rain began to fall again, mixing with the dirt and her tears until she couldn't tell them apart. For a long time, she just knelt there, listening to the wind. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to fight, to make sure he was still breathing. But Ethan's last words echoed in her mind. "You'll never find her." He had done it to protect her child. And that meant she couldn't waste his sacrifice. Grace forced herself to her feet, every muscle trembling. The flash drive was slick with rain in her hand, the ink from its label smearing under her thumb. "You didn't die for nothing," she whispered. "I'll finish this." Her voice cracked, but her resolve hardened with every breath. Somewhere behind her, the farmhouse burned. Flames clawed at the night sky, a silent funeral pyre for the man who had given her another chance to live. Grace watched from a distance, her heart breaking and rebuilding itself in the same beat. The fire reflected in her eyes, grief and fury fused into purpose. Turning away, she disappeared into the forest's shadows. The rain drowned out her footsteps as she vanished into the night. The drive pulsed in her palm like a heartbeat, the proof of everything, the corruption, the lies, the reason for all the pain. And as thunder rolled above, Grace made a promise to the darkness. They will pay. The city skyline shimmered beneath the rain as Grace emerged from the forest, drenched and exhausted. She had walked for hours, guided only by the faint glow of distant lights. Every step felt heavier than the last, but Ethan's voice still echoed in her mind. "Finish this." In her pocket, the flash drive felt alive, pulsing with truth and danger. She found shelter in an abandoned bus station on the outskirts of town. The flickering lights buzzed overhead, casting long, broken shadows. Grace collapsed onto a bench, her breath shallow. She could still see the farmhouse burning behind her eyes. For a moment, she wanted to sleep, to forget. But forgetting would mean his death meant nothing. At dawn, she tore a strip of fabric from her sleeve and tied her hair back. Her reflection in a cracked vending machine glass looked like someone else. A ghost, reborn. "You wanted a fight," she whispered. "You've got one." With trembling hands, she powered up a dusty laptop she found in the lost and found box. The drive fit perfectly into the port. The screen flickered to life, lines of data filling the black void. Grace scrolled through documents, photos and signatures, files that confirmed everything Ethan had said. Hospital records, falsified death certificates, blood shipments under fake charity programs. The scale of it made her stomach twist. "God," she whispered, "how many?" She connected to the hospital's main network using an old VPN code she still remembered. The system recognized her credentials. Nurse Grace Harper. The name flashed across the monitor like an accusation and a weapon. "Let's see if you still remember me," she muttered, her fingers flying over the keys. Outside, sirens wailed faintly, distant but growing. Grace ignored them. The upload bar on her screen crept slowly upward. 15%, 32%, 57%. Her hands shook, but her focus never wavered. Was a heartbeat closer to redemption, a wound closing in the world's conscience. When the upload reached 100%, the screen went black. For a moment, she thought she'd failed. Then, one by one, monitors across the city began to flicker. In hospital lobbies, in police stations, in crowded cafes, her voice filled the screens, shaky but unbroken. "My name is Grace Harper. I was accused of negligence, but the truth is, I was punished for saving a life." Images followed, Records, documents, faces of those who had profited from suffering. The footage cut through the city like lightning, impossible to ignore. People stopped what they were doing, drawn to the sound of her trembling defiance. Grace's confession wasn't perfect. It was human, raw, cracked, real. As the world watched, tears rolled down her face. "If you've ever been silenced," she said, "if they've ever taken what you love and told you it was your fault, this is for you." Her voice broke on the last word. "For him, for my daughter, for the truth." Then the screens went dark again. The silence that followed was almost holy. Grace shut the laptop, her hands still trembling, her heart pounding in the echo of her own voice. The storm outside had ended, but she knew the war was just beginning. The city was no longer the same when the sun rose. Streets buzzed with confusion and outrage, news vans clogged intersections, and reporters shouted into microphones about the nurse who exposed the system. Grace watched from a hidden alley, the hood of her coat pulled low. She had lit the fire, and now the world was burning. She slipped into the back seat of a parked car. Lena was there, engine running, eyes sharp. "You did it," she said softly. "Every network picked it up." Grace stared straight ahead. "They'll come for me." Lena nodded. "They already are." Her tone was calm, but her knuckles tightened around the steering wheel. They drove in silence through back roads and underpasses, the radio spitting out fragments of news. Hundreds of officials under investigation. Medical board denies involvement. Grace's pulse quickened with every word. Somewhere in all that chaos, she could almost hear Ethan's voice whispering, "You finished it." They reached an abandoned train yard on the city's edge. Rusted freight cars stretched endlessly, like relics of forgotten lives. Lena parked behind an old warehouse and turned to Grace. "Someone's been waiting to see you." Grace frowned. "Who?" Before Lena could answer, the door slid open, and a familiar voice said, "Grace." She turned and froze. Ethan stood there, bruised, bandaged, but alive. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. "No," she whispered. I heard the shot." He smiled faintly, wincing from pain. "Missed the heart. Guess they don't teach aim like they used to." Grace's breath rushed to him. Tears welled up instantly around his shoulders. The scent of smoke and antiseptic clung to him. "You're real," she whispered against his chest. "You're alive." Ethan's voice trembled as he held her. "You made it out. That's what matters." But behind the relief, his eyes carried something deeper, sorrow and a secret. "I couldn't save them all," he said quietly. "Lena found me after the fire. We lost good people that night." Grace nodded, tears falling freely. "You saved enough," she whispered. "You saved me." The words hung between them, fragile, sacred. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and a pale light began to break through the clouds. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "There's one more thing," he said. Grace unwrapped it, her daughter's hospital bracelet. The small tag still bore the name Harper, infant girl. Grace's breath hitched. "Where did you get this?" Ethan smiled weakly. A small cry echoed from behind one of the freight cars, faint but unmistakable. Grace's heart stopped. She turned slowly, the sound drawing her forward, and there, wrapped in a clean white blanket, was her baby, asleep, safe, untouched by the chaos of the world. Grace fell to her knees, sobbing with relief. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Now," he whispered, his voice breaking, "it's your turn to save another life, your own." Grace looked up at him through her tears. The world outside was still broken, still cruel, but for the first time in forever, hope didn't feel impossible. It felt alive. The morning light filtered softly through the warehouse windows, bathing everything in gold. Grace held her daughter close, feeling the small heartbeat against her chest. For the first time in what felt like centuries, she could breathe without fear. The storm had passed, outside and within. Yet she knew peace wasn't the same as safety. Not yet. News of her broadcast had spread across the country. Investigations opened overnight. Arrests had begun. Doctors, board members, even government officials. Grace watched the reports in silence, tears glistening in her eyes. The truth was finally out. People were listening, and somewhere Ethan's brother could rest in peace. Ethan stood by the door, his arms still in a sling. "You don't have to keep fighting," he said gently. Grace shook her head. "Yes, I do. Not for revenge. For justice." She looked down at her daughter, smiling faintly. She deserves to grow up in a world where truth isn't punished. Ethan's eyes softened. "Then let's finish this right." That afternoon, Grace walked into the courthouse with her baby in her arms. Cameras flashed, voices shouted her name, but she didn't flinch. The same people who once called her a criminal now called her a hero. Yet she didn't feel like one, just a mother who refused to be silenced. On the stand, she told everything. About the lies, the cover-ups, the fear. About the man who'd given his life and nearly lost it, so that the truth could live. Her voice never faltered. Every sentence felt like lifting a weight from her soul. And when she finished, the courtroom was silent. No applause, just truth settling like dust after a storm. Weeks later, Grace returned to the old farmhouse. The ruins were still there, charred wood, broken glass, the ghost of a battle fought in shadows. She laid a single white flower on the ground. "We made it," she whispered. "You were right. They couldn't stop it." The wind rustled through the trees as if answering her. Ethan joined her quietly, standing beside her in the sunlight. His face still bore the scars, but his eyes were lighter now. "You kept your promise," he said softly. Grace smiled. "No," she replied, "we kept it." For a long time they stood there, the silence between them saying what words never could. Later that evening, Grace walked along the edge of the forest with her daughter in her arms. The sky burned orange with the setting sun, painting the world in warmth and hope. The baby stirred, opening her tiny eyes for the first time that day. Grace kissed her forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered. "We both are." As the wind carried the scent of rain and pine, Grace thought of all she had lost and all she had found. She was no longer the nurse defined by her mistakes. She was the woman who refused to let lies become truth, the mother who faced the storm and walked out alive. And somewhere deep inside, that gave her peace. When the night fell, Grace turned to the camera one last time, her face calm, her eyes bright. "When the world took everything from me," she said, "I learned something they couldn't steal. Love. If you're still watching, tell me where you're from. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of courage can save a life, even your own."